Nadia Voss came into the world at 3:47 in the morning, in a small apartment on the east edge of Miran, and her mother Elena cried for 2 hours straight, not from pain, but because she already knew what was coming. The baby had fangs. Small ones. Barely there. 2 little points pressing against the inside of her lower lip like secrets waiting to be told. Elena had touched them with the tip of her finger in the dark of that hospital room, and the nurse who was still in the corner pretended she hadn't seen. Adrian Voss was not there. He had been there 9 months before, charming and cold, beautiful in the way that creatures like him always were, the kind of man who made you feel chosen just by the way he looked at you. Elena had known what he was. That was the part she never admitted to anyone. She had known, and she had loved him anyway, because knowing something and believing it are 2 entirely different animals, and she had made the mistake of confusing them. He left 6 weeks before Nadia was born. There was no fight. No scene. He simply did not come home one Thursday evening, and Elena had found his side of the closet empty when she went to hang up her coat. 3 suits gone. His shoes. The black leather bag he always kept packed. He left a note. 1 line. "This is not a life I can live." Elena kept it in the back of a kitchen drawer for 11 years before she burned it. She thought destroying it would feel like something. It didn't. The ash was just ash. Nadia grew up in the apartment on Miran's East Edge, which was neither a bad neighborhood nor a good one, just a tired one, buildings that hadn't been painted since the 90s, a corner store that always smelled like burned coffee, children who played in the street until the streetlights came on and, then, played a little longer because no one was really watching. Elena worked double shifts at the hospital 3 days a week, nursing, because she was the kind of person whose hands were built for caring for other people. She was a good mother. She was tired in the particular way of women who hold everything alone and smile while doing it. Nadia understood early that she was different. Not in the romantic sense children sometimes imagine when they want to be special. In the concrete, ugly, school cafeteria sense. She was faster than every other kid on the track without trying. She could see in the dark as clearly as she could see in noon light. She didn't sunburn, but she could feel the sun differently than others did, not painful, just loud, like a sound pitched slightly above hearing that never quite went away. She ran warmer than a normal person, and her skin had a quality to it that made people pull back without knowing why. A kind of stillness underneath the surface. Like looking at water and not being able to see the bottom. The fangs stayed small. Barely visible unless she laughed too wide, or got frightened, or angry. She learned not to do those things around people she didn't trust. She trusted exactly 2 people in Miran. Her mother. And Sarah Hallis, who sat next to her in 4th grade and told her in a flat, matter-of-fact voice that she didn't care what Nadia was because she had worse problems, like her parents' divorce and the fact that she was allergic to basically everything fun. Sarah became her best friend the way best friends are made at that age, through proximity and shared suffering and the slow accumulation of inside jokes that stop being funny and start being a language. Everyone else kept their distance. Children are honest in ways adults have learned to hide. In Miran's public school, the honesty came in the form of empty seats beside her at assembly, conversations that stopped when she walked into a room, a particular kind of quiet that followed her down hallways. Not cruelty, exactly. Just exclusion. The soft, daily version that leaves no mark you can point to. Nadia learned to be fine with it. Not healed by it. Not hardened. Just fine. The way you become fine with whether you can't change. What she was not fine with, what she carried in the very back of herself where she tried not to look, was the question of her father. Elena didn't lie to her. She gave her what she could, his name, the fact that he was a vampire of old blood and some standing, that he had not been a bad man so much as a man who had not wanted this, had not wanted her. She said it carefully. She chose every word like she was diffusing something. Nadia listened. Nodded. Said she understood. She understood nothing. She was 7. By the time she was 12 she had built a full, detailed, frequently revised internal architecture around her father's absence. She had done what abandoned children do, she had made the absence mean something specific about herself. That she was the wrong kind of both things. Too human to belong to his world. Too vampire to belong to the human one. That his leaving was a verdict and not a failure, because he had looked at what she was and found it lacking and simply gone. She wore this the way you wear a coat that doesn't fit, pulled tight around her, functional, covering everything. At 14, a vampire found her. Not her father. She was past hoping for that by then. This one was young, relatively, maybe 200 years, which in vampire terms made him something like a reckless 20-something with the impulse control to match. His name was Dorian, and he worked for one of the minor noble houses in the city's vampire quarter, which was tucked into the old district behind the cathedral and operated in the way all poorly regulated power structures operate, with a lot of ornate furniture and people willing to do ugly things to stay near it. He found her at the river path near the East Bridge one evening, where she liked to walk because it was empty. He had been looking for her specifically. She didn't know that yet. He was polite, at first. The politeness of someone who wants something. He told her he had heard about her. He told her the vampire community in Mirren knew about Elena Voss's half-blood daughter, had known for years, had been watching with the kind of quiet observation that is indistinguishable from surveillance. He told her she was technically subject to vampire law and custom, whether she knew it or not, because her blood was what it was, and that wasn't something she got to opt out of. Then, he told her that if she wanted protection, real protection, the kind that would keep the less polite members of his world from deciding she was a problem to solve, she might want to consider placing herself under the patronage of his lord. What he meant was, come be useful to us, and, in exchange we will not hurt you. He said it very nicely. Nadia walked home and threw up in the bathroom sink and sat on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes staring at the drain. Then, she washed her face and made pasta for dinner and did not tell her mother. She was 14. She handled things alone because that was what she had learned to do, and because some part of her believed that needing help was the fastest way to lose what little ground you had. She didn't go to Dorian's lord. What she did instead was teach herself. It started with a library card and a section of the stacks that technically housed regional history but practically housed a range of older texts that nobody read and nobody removed, and she worked through them with the specific, quiet focus of someone who has decided that information is the only armor available to them. She learned what she was. Dhampir. Half-blood. A category that had no clean place in vampire taxonomy, too powerful to be ignored, not pure enough to be admitted. In the old world, Dhampirs had been hunters, used for their ability to move in daylight and track their full-blooded kin. Used and, then, discarded. The language in the texts around Dhampirs was always the language of utility. Always what they could do. Never what they were. She read that and felt something settle in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of deep water. She kept reading anyway. By 16 she could identify vampire blood types by scent, track a full blood through 3 city blocks without being noticed, and had enough working knowledge of vampire law to understand where she stood, which was, technically, nowhere. A Dhampir with no patron, no house affiliation, no acknowledged vampire parent held no legal status in the vampire world and no protections within it. Her father's abandonment had left her with nothing but the biology. She tried, once, to find him. She was 17. She had his name, his last known affiliation, a house out of the Northern Territories, old blood, old money, the kind of name that opened doors. She wrote a letter. Not asking him to come back. She was past that. She wrote asking only for acknowledgement. For her name to be entered in his house registry, which would give her legal standing, a record that said she existed within the structure of his world. She addressed it carefully. Sent it through 3 different channels she had spent months identifying. Waited. 6 weeks later a response came in an envelope with a wax seal she didn't recognize. It was from his house secretary. Lord Voss does not acknowledge any claim upon him from the individual named in this correspondence. He respectfully asks that no further contact be attempted, *respectfully. She read that word 4 times. She folded the letter. Put it in her coat pocket. Walked to the East Bridge. stood there for a long time looking at the river, which was grey and very cold and moving the way rivers move when no one is watching them. Then, she walked home. She didn't cry. She had already used up the version of herself that cried about her father. What was left was something harder. Not healed. Just cauterized. The difference between a wound and a scar is not that one stops hurting, it's that one stops bleeding. She bled for years over Adrian Voss. The scar was new. She touched it sometimes in the quiet, the way you touch something that still aches, just to confirm it does. Elena noticed the change in her. Mothers always do, even when they can't name what they're seeing. She made tea one Saturday morning and sat across the kitchen table from her daughter and said, carefully, "You don't have to be okay." Nadia looked at her. "I know," she said. She meant it. She also meant the opposite. Both things were true and she held them like two stones in two fists, and she sat at that table with her mother who had worked double shifts for 17 years to keep her fed and safe and housed, and she thought, this is the person who stayed. This is what staying looks like. It looks like tired hands and a kitchen table and tea made without asking. She did not cry then, either. But something in her recognized it. Filed it away. The shape of what love actually looked like when it wasn't performing itself. At 18, she left Mirren. Not running. Not escaping. She left the way you leave a place you have already outgrown, with a bag packed carefully, a long hug for her mother, and the knowledge that the apartment on the East Edge would always be there if she needed to come back to it. Elena stood in the doorway and did not try to stop her because she understood that some things in her daughter needed space to grow that this city couldn't provide. Be careful, Elena said. Always, Nadia told her. She had $40 in her wallet, a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, 3 books on vampire law, and a letter of introduction she had written herself, forged under a minor house seal she had spent 2 weeks learning to replicate, because she had no patron to write one for her and she was done waiting for permission from people who had already decided she didn't matter. The train north left at 6 in the morning. She sat in the window seat and watched Mirren shrink behind her, and she did not feel the romantic sorrow of departure that movies would suggest. She felt hungry. And, underneath the hunger, a specific and sharp and clarifying thing that she had been carrying so long she'd almost stopped recognizing it as what it was. Rage. Not the burning kind. Not the kind that makes you break things. The kind that runs cold and focused and very, very quiet. The kind that knows exactly what it's for. She was 18 years old, she was half-blood and unacknowledged and owned by no house and beholden to no lord, and she was heading north into the heart of a world that had decided she didn't exist. She was going to make it see her. And Adrian Voss, wherever he was in his well-sealed northern estate with his secretary and his wax-stamped letters, she wasn't going north for him. She had made her peace with the wound that he was. What she was going north for was herself. What came next would not be simple. It never was. But she had 17 years of practice being fine with things that weren't simple, and the train was warm, and outside the window the sky was just beginning to go pink at the edge, the way it does in the hour before real light arrives, and Nadia Voss pressed her forehead against the glass and watched it come. The north was nothing like she had imagined it and exactly like she had read about it, which is to say it was cold in a way that went past weather and into character. The city of Valdresh sat at the base of the Oran Mountains like something that had been pressed there by a great weight and decided to stay. The buildings were old in the particular way of things that have never been allowed to fall, maintained, restorative, a kind of architectural stubbornness that expressed itself in carved stone and iron-framed windows and streets that were always clean even when it snowed all night. The vampire quarter of Valdresh wasn't tucked away the way it was in Mirren. It was the city. The vampire quarter was the old city, the first city, the bones of the place, and everything human had been built around it and, between it the way moss grows around stone. Humans and vampires had coexisted in Valdresh for 400 years in the specific, managed way of 2 species that have agreed not to start problems because the last time they did it was very bad for everyone. The agreement held. Mostly. What Nadia had not accounted for was the way the city smelled. She stepped off the train at Valdresh Central at 20 minutes past 8 in the morning and stood on the platform while everyone moved around her, and she just stood there for a full 30 seconds because her senses had never been asked to do this much at once. Old blood. A dozen different bloodlines mixing in the air like harmonics. Ancient. Layered. The city's vampire population was not transient the way Mirren's was, they had been here for centuries, and the city held their presence the way old wood holds smoke, deep in the grain. She inhaled. Felt her fangs press forward just slightly, instinctive, the way a hand rises when you lose balance. She pressed them back with her tongue and straightened and walked. She spent the first 3 days establishing the shape of the city. This was how she had always operated, before action, comprehension. She found a room above a laundry on the edge of the market district, paid for a week, and then walked. Morning, afternoon, evening. Different routes. Different neighborhoods. She mapped it the way she mapped everything, not on paper, but in her body, in the instinctive tracking that was one of the things her father's blood had given her even if he had given her nothing else. She identified the hierarchy within the first 24 hours. The Vampire Society of Valdresh ran through 6 noble houses, each with territory and claim and the kind of grinding internal politics that come from immortal beings who had been competing for the same resources since before anyone alive could remember. At the top of the structure, above and separate from the house system, was the Morin court, the bloodline that had held the kingship of the northern vampire territories for 6 centuries without interruption. The king's name was Cale Morin. She had read about him. What the book said was carefully neutral in the way that texts written about powerful people always are, acknowledging his authority, documenting his reign, declining to editorialize. What she heard in the market, in the laundry below her room, in the late-night conversations she was not meant to overhear, that was different. He was not a gentle king. He was a just one, which was a different animal entirely. He had not started wars in his reign, but he had ended 3, and the way he ended them left impressions. He ran his court with a precision that the noble houses resented and respected in equal measure. He was, by all accounts, not someone who made space for softness, and not someone whose attention you wanted unless you were very sure you could hold it without flinching. She was not afraid of him. She was aware of him, which was different, the way you're aware of gravity. It doesn't require fear. It just requires accounting for. On her 4th day, she made her first move. She applied through official channels for an audience with the House Registrar of Valdresh, which was the administrative body that maintained bloodline records for the vampire community. She wanted her Dhampir status formally documented, not under her father's house, not anymore, not after his secretary's careful letter, but under her own name, as an independent half-blood. It was a legal category that existed in theory and had essentially never been used. The registrar's office was on the ground floor of a building that smelled like old paper and power. The woman behind the counter had been there for a long time, not immortal, but long. She looked at Nadia's application form with the expression of a person encountering a document in a language they technically speak but haven't used in decades. "You're applying as an unaffiliated Dhampir," she said. "Yes." "No house sponsorship." "No." "No patron." "No." The woman set the form down. The last time someone made this application was in 1887. What happened to them? A pause. It was processed. "Then, mine can be too," Nadia said. The form was processed. It took 11 days and 2 follow-up visits during which Nadia was told to wait, which she did, not patiently, but quietly, which is not the same thing. She waited the way a person waits when they have learned that waiting is sometimes the only move available and that doing it poorly costs you. At the end of the 11 days she received a document with a Valdresh seal that confirmed her as a legally registered Dhampir within the Northern Territory, unaffiliated, independent, and therefore subject to the full protection of vampire law while simultaneously owing fealty to no house. She held the document in the laundry room above her bed and thought, there you are. Existing on paper. Recognized. It was not a triumph. It was a floor. Just the lowest level of ground to stand on. She slept better that night than she had in months. The house that gave her the most trouble was called Desire. House Vizier was mid-rank in the Valdresh hierarchy, not the oldest, not the most powerful, but the most aggressive about maintaining what it had. Their territory ran through the northern quarter and into the market district, and their lord, a vampire named Kalen Vizier who had been navigating court politics since the 16th century, had developed the specialized skill of finding people whose ambiguity made them useful to leverage. Nadia was ambiguous in about 6 different directions. She had his attention within a week of her registration. The first approach was polite. One of his people found her in the market and extended an invitation to a gathering, framed as social, framed as friendly. She declined. The second approach was less polite and came in the form of 2 of his people waiting for her on the street near her building at 11 at night, suggesting that an unaffiliated damper operating in Vizier territory without acknowledgement of that fact was operating on credit she had not earned. She put one of them through a fruit cart. She did it efficiently, in about 4 seconds, and then stood over him while the second one recalculated, and said, clearly, that she was a legally registered independent under Valdresh law and she owed acknowledgement to no house, and if Lord Vizier had a problem with that he was welcome to raise it through the official court channels he technically had access to. Then, she walked home. Her hands were shaking the whole way. Not from fear. From the effort of holding herself at exactly the right pitch, enough force to be a message, not enough to give anyone grounds to escalate. It was a math she had been doing her whole life, the math of how much of yourself you were allowed to be before it became a problem, and she was exhausted by it, had always been exhausted by it, but she had never once gotten the calculation wrong and she wasn't starting now. She ate the apple she'd bought at the cart, it had fallen in the commotion and she'd picked it up on the way out and went to sleep. She met Cale Morin by accident. She had been in Valdresh for 6 weeks. She was on her way to the registry office for a follow-up regarding her residential documentation, cutting through the old quarter on the route she usually took, when she turned a corner and walked directly into a commotion she had not anticipated. There were 6 of Vizier's people in the narrow street ahead of her. She registered that before she registered anything else, the Vizier house colors, the way they were arranged, and the fact that they were arranged around a single person in a way that was specifically designed to be a message. She stopped walking. Assessed. The person they were surrounding looked young, which in vampire terms meant nothing, and he was handling it with a kind of bored steadiness that read like either confidence or complete indifference. What she also registered, half a second later, was the presence of people behind her. Not Viziers. Different. Moving with the specific economy of trained protection, and wearing the court colors of Morin. She had walked into the middle of something. The young man in the center of the Vizier circle looked at her. He had a quality to him that was hard to locate precisely, not the cold beauty of her father's type, nothing ornamental about it, but a kind of absolute solidity, like something that had been tested so many times it had stopped being aware of the testing. His eyes were very dark and he looked at her with the complete, assessing attention of someone who has learned to read situations the way other people read text. Then, he looked back at the Vizier people and said, mildly, "You have 30 seconds to be somewhere else." It was not a threat. Threats have heat in them. It was a statement of physics. They left in 25. The court guards came up on either side of her, not touching her, just present, and she stood in the street with an apple core in her hand and the specific feeling of a person who has walked into a room and cannot find the door. He turned to her. "You're the unaffiliated damper," he said. Not a question. Yes. The one who put Vizier's man through a cart. He was in the way of the cart, she said. The cart made its own choices. Something moved in his face. Not a smile. The precursor to a smile that he declined to complete. "Cale Morin," he said. She looked at him. "I know who you are." "Then, you understand," he said, "that I've been aware of your registration since the day it was processed." She understood. Of course he had. An unaffiliated damper showing up in his city and filing independent paperwork and putting house members through produce displays was not a thing that flew under the radar of a man who had maintained a 6th-century kingship through meticulous attention to exactly this kind of detail. "I'm not a problem," she said. "I didn't say you were." He studied her. "I said I was aware of you. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. Adjusted her grip on the apple core. What do you want? Nothing yet, he said. I wanted to see you. That sat in the air between them in a way she didn't entirely know what to do with. Not threatening. Not flattering. Just honest, and unusual in the specific way that honesty is always unusual when you're not used to it. She nodded, once. She turned to go. Your father's name is in our registry, he said, behind her. Quiet. Careful. Like a person setting something down gently. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. His house, Cale said. The acknowledgement he refused you, it's documented here. What he did. Or didn't do. Her jaw was very tight. She was aware of the apple core in her hand and the pressure of her fingers against it and the cold Valdresh wind coming down the narrow street and the sound of the market 2 blocks away, ordinary and loud. I'm aware of what he did, she said. I know, he said. I wanted you to know that I am too. She stood there one more second. 2. Walked. She didn't look back. She went to her registry appointment and sat across the counter from the clerk and answered questions about her residential address and signed 3 forms and kept her face very still the whole time, and it was only when she was back in her room above the laundry, sitting on the edge of the bed, that she let herself feel the shape of what had just happened. He had not offered her anything. Had not asked for anything. Had simply made sure she knew that someone in a position to know had looked at the record and seen what it contained. It was, she thought, the smallest possible gesture. She sat with it for a long time. It was not a small thing how it felt. She did not seek him out. She was not built for seeking people out and finding them trustworthy. That was not the architecture her life had given her. She operated on the assumption, earned across 17 years and 1 wax-sealed letter, that the people who appeared in your life with power and interest did so because they wanted something from you, and that the wanting was the point, and that you would be wise to keep your distance until you understood what the wanting was. So she kept her distance. She took up work, she had the skills, and Valdresh had the kind of irregular problems that could use someone who could move quickly in daylight and track effectively after dark. She worked through 2 of the minor houses, careful to take no affiliation, payment only, nothing that created obligation. She built a small reputation, the kind built from results and silence, and she kept her room above the laundry and she kept her distance. From Desire. From the minor houses who circled her with interest she didn't trust. From Cale Morin. Except that 3 weeks after the street encounter she was hired to track a piece of stolen house property through the northern quarter and the trail led her, through a sequence of logical steps she had not manufactured, into the outer courtyard of Morin Court, where she found the stolen property and also found Cale. He looked at her. Every time, he said. I'm following evidence, she said. I know. A pause. He looked at what she'd found. Looked back at her. Come inside. I'll have someone take that and you can be paid for your time. I don't need, it's cold, he said, simply. And you've been tracking through the quarter for 5 hours. Come inside. She stood in the courtyard with the evidence and the cold and the sense of a man who was not performing kindness, not doing the practiced warmth of someone who wants something, but simply acknowledging a fact the way you acknowledge weather. She went inside. That was where it began. Not with grand declarations. Not with gestures that announced themselves. With cold air and a trail she had followed honestly, and a door held open by a man who had looked at her record and seen what her father had taken from her, and decided without ceremony or explanation that she was worth the warmth. She walked through it. She was still afraid of what that meant. She walked through it anyway. Morin Court was not what she had expected. She had built it in her imagination from the texts she'd read, formal, ancient, the kind of space designed to remind everyone inside it of exactly how much power it contained. And it was those things. The ceilings were old stone, high, carved in the style of the 4th century, and the rooms were the particular size of rooms that have never needed to apologize for themselves. But it was also used. She could feel that. The wear in the hallway floors, the way the main fire in the lower hall had been burning so consistently that the stone above it had gone permanently dark, the presence of people moving through it with the ease of a place that is home before it is court. She sat in a side room off the main hall, and a woman brought tea without being asked, and the tea was very hot and came with a small plate of things she hadn't eaten in 2 days, and she drank it and ate and watched the room and waited. Cale came back in 20 minutes. He sat across from her without ceremony, which she had already noticed was the way he did most things, without ceremony, without the staging that powerful people often use as a reminder of what they are. He looked at her the way he had in the street, direct and assessing, and then, he said, "How long have you been working through the minor houses?" 6 weeks. "Are they treating you fairly?" She considered the question. In her experience, fair was a flexible concept when applied to vampires negotiating with people who had no leverage, but she also had to acknowledge that the work had been delivered as promised and she had been paid what was agreed and no one had tried to leverage her into anything more. "Reasonably," she said. He nodded. "If that changes," he said, "I want to know." She looked at him. Why? It was a real question, not a performance of suspicion. She genuinely wanted to understand the architecture of what he was doing and what he expected it to produce. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you are legally registered in my city," he said, "and anything that happens to you within these borders is my accountability." That's the administrative answer. And the other answer? He looked at her. "Your registration noted your father's name," he said, "and what he declined." "I've known of Adrian Voss for a long time. He has been many things in this world and generous has not been one of them." A pause, measured. "You came here alone, at 18, with no affiliation and no patron and no backing, and you filed your own documentation and you've been working through houses that would use you if they could, and you haven't let them. You've done all of that without a single person in your corner." He stopped. "I find that I have a problem with it." She sat with that. Outside, the wind off the Oran Mountains moved against the court windows, a sound like breath held and released. "That's not an administrative answer," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She did not move into the court. She kept her room above the laundry. She kept working her contracts. She kept the independence she had built not out of stubbornness but because she understood, in the very practical part of herself that had been educated by a lifetime of having only herself to rely on, that dependency was a form of vulnerability and she was not ready to be vulnerable to anything she didn't fully understand yet. But she began, slowly, to let herself be present at the court. Cale did not ask her to stop working. He did not suggest she needed his protection, which she had been braced for, the language of patronage that would have translated in her head as, "Be useful to me and I will keep you safe," same as Dorian on the riverside path in Mirren when she was 14, same architecture, different name. He never said anything like that. What he did instead was make space. She would arrive at the court following a contract, and there would be a room available to clean up if she needed it. There would be food if she was hungry. There would be people who did not look at her Dhampir status as a source of either threat or fascination, just noted it, adjusted around it, and moved on. He would be there sometimes, working, and he would look up and acknowledge her and return to his work, and she was permitted to be in the same room in a way that required nothing of her. She had not, until then, understood how rare a thing that was. To be in a space and simply be allowed to exist in it. She tested it. Instinctively, without fully meaning to, she arrived difficult, sometimes tight-end, defensive and sharp, waiting for the quality of welcome to shift. It didn't. She was late to things. She disagreed, once, loudly and, specifically, with a tactical decision Cale made in her presence, in front of 2 of his senior court members, and he looked at her and said, "You're right," and corrected it, and did not reference it later. She went home that night and sat on her bed and stared at the wall. She had been right before, in her life. She had been right many times. She had never once had a person with power look at her and simply say it. Marcus Fell was Cale's chief advisor, 60 years old in human terms, which meant he had been in the court since before Nadia was born, had seen everything the court had ever weathered, and had developed the specific calm of someone who had learned to place things in correct proportion. He was the one who told her, one afternoon in the court archive where she had been given access to bloodline records for a contract, what Cale had done the week after she filed her registration. She didn't know he had done anything. He contacted Houseboss, Marcus said, not looking up from the ledger he was cross-referencing. Casual. Factual. Like noting the weather. Formally. Through court channels. He informed Lord Voss that his unacknowledged Dhampir daughter had registered in Valdresh, that she was legally documented and under the court's notice, and that any further failure to acknowledge her was now a matter of Northern Territory record. Nadia's hand went still on the page she was reading. Lord Voss sent a response, Marcus continued. Which was not unlike the response he sent you, except addressed to a king rather than a young woman, which meant it required a great deal more delicate language to communicate the same basic message. What was Cale's response to that? Marcus looked up. He had the eyes of someone who had watched a very long story unfold across a very long time. He added it to the record, he said. Every refusal. Documented. In the permanent registry of the Northern Territories, where it will stay as long as the court stands. A pause. Your father will eventually want something from this court. Every house eventually does. When he comes, it will be there. She looked at the ledger in front of her. The names in it. The unbroken lines of acknowledged bloodlines, centuries deep. He didn't tell me, she said. No, Marcus agreed. He wasn't doing it for credit. She sat with that in the archive for a long time after Marcus left. Outside, the Valdresh winter was doing what it always did to serious, committed, no performance in it. The archive was quiet the way old buildings are quiet, a quiet with texture, with the weight of everything stored inside it. She thought about what it meant to do something for someone without the intent of being seen doing it. She was not sure she had ever been the recipient of that before. 6 months after she arrived in Valdresh, Adrian Voss came north. He came, as Marcus had predicted, with purpose. He needed something from the Morin court, a land arbitration involving the northern edge of his territory that only the king could formalize. He arrived with a retinue and the specific ease of a man who has navigated power for centuries and knows how to occupy a room. Nadia knew he was coming 2 days before he arrived. She sat with the knowing for those 2 days and she examined it the way you examine something you thought you had already dealt with and discover is still, underneath the scar tissue, a live thing. She was not 18 anymore, sitting on the floor beside the bathroom sink. She was not 17, holding an unopened letter from a secretary. She was in Valdresh, in her room above a laundry, and she was documented and present and she had done that herself, and her father walking into the court where she had begun to build something was not an unmaking of what she had built. She told herself that. She told it to herself several times and most of it landed. She went to the court on the day of his arrival because she refused to hide. She saw him for the first time in her life from across the width of the main hall. He looked like her, in the specific way of parents and children, the structural echo that genetics makes regardless of what the parent has chosen. His height. Her height. The way he held stillness in his body, the quality of presence she had always thought was just hers. It wasn't just hers. She had it from him, the way you inherit a language from someone who will not speak to you. He did not see her immediately. Cale did. He was across the hall at the entrance point of the formal receiving corridor, and he looked at her in the moment Adrian entered, a single, direct look that said, I know what this is. Then, he returned his attention to the man approaching him and his face told nothing. Adrian got close enough to the center of the hall to see her. He stopped. She watched him look at her. She watched him work through it, the recognition, the math of her face, the calculation of what her being here meant and how he wanted to handle it. She watched all of that move through him in about 4 seconds. She stood very still. She was not performing calm. The calm was real. She had arrived at it through the specific process of having been broken by a person and, then, rebuilt something out of the pieces that the person could no longer reach. Cale said, from where he stood, clearly and, without raising his voice, Lord Voss. My court is aware of your registered history with the Dhampir Nadia Voss. Her documentation, and the full record of your acknowledgments and non-acknowledgments, is a permanent part of our registry. Any arbitration you seek from this court will proceed with the court's understanding of that record intact. It was not a speech. He was not performing anything. He was just making sure Adrian understood the room he was in. Adrian looked at Cale. Then, he looked at Nadia. Then, he said, in the voice she had only ever heard in the one-line note from when she was 7, even though she couldn't remember his voice, she recognized it. The body remembers things the mind never catalogued. She shouldn't be here. Cale looked at him. She was here before you, he said. You can revise your sense of who belongs where. Adrian left within the hour. The arbitration was conducted through written correspondence, through channels, without him present. He got what he needed, and the record stood, and Nadia stood in the court with her name in the permanent registry of a king who had chosen to make her visible in the only room her father had ever needed to see her in. She found Cale that evening in the lower hall by the fire that had been burning long enough to blacken the stone above it. He was alone, working, the way he was often alone and working, and he looked up when she came in and did not pretend he didn't know what the day had been. She sat down across from him. She looked at the fire for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You don't need to thank me. I know I don't need to." She looked at him. "I want to." He set down what he was working on. He looked at her with the attention that was, she had come to understand, not a performance of interest but, the thing itself, the genuine orientation of a person towards someone they have decided to see. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to do anything. She thought about 17 years in a city where she had learned to be fine without being healed. She thought about the train and the pink sky. The registry document she had filed herself. The way it felt to put his man through a fruit cart in the dark and be scared and keep going anyway. The archive. Marcus's careful voice. The way this court had made space for her without asking for anything in return. "I don't know," she said. "I think I might be all right." It was not a declaration. It was not a resolution. It was an honest assessment. He nodded. "You're going to be more than all right," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know that." "I know what I've watched you do in 6 months," he said. "I know what it took to do it." He paused. "And I intend to make sure you always have a place where the answer to that question is not in doubt." She sat with that. The fire moved. Outside the windows the Valdresh night was deep and cold and very clear, the kind of night where you can see a long way. "You can't promise that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I can commit to it." There's a difference. The distinction sat between them and she turned it over. A promise was a statement about the future. A commitment was a statement about action, present, ongoing, something you chose not once but repeatedly. Something you could not guarantee but could practice. She thought of her mother at a kitchen table with tired hands and tea made without asking. She thought of what staying looked like. How unspectacular it was. How it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever witnessed. "Okay," she said. Not surrender. Not rescue. Recognition. The acknowledgement of something real offered honestly, by a person who had had 6 centuries to learn the difference between what was real and what wasn't and had decided, with full information, that she was worth the commitment. She had spent 18 years in the belief that she was the verdict of her father's leaving. That the absence meant something about what she was. That she was the wrong kind of both things and, therefore not enough of either. She sat in the lower hall of Morin Court and let herself feel, very carefully, around the edges of what it might mean to be wrong about that. It didn't resolve. It didn't heal in an evening or a week or a season. Wounds don't. But something shifted. Tectonic, slow, deep. The scar that had replaced the bleeding was still there. It would always be there, the shape of Adrian Voss pressed into her history, the one-line note, the secretary's letter, the cold precision of a man who looked at his own daughter and chose his convenience. She would always carry the weight of having been left by the person who was supposed to stay first, who was supposed to be the first proof that she was worth staying for. She was going to carry it into every room for the rest of her life. But she was not going to carry it alone. That was new. That was the thing that was genuinely, concretely new, not the healing, not the resolution, but the company. The specific presence of a man who had looked at the record of what was done to her and decided without being asked that it mattered, that she mattered, and who sat across a fire in an old hall and committed to making sure she always knew it. She stayed in the hall a long time that night. When she finally went back to her room above the laundry, the city was quiet in the way Valdresh was quiet after midnight, ancient and settled, everything old accepting everything new into itself without fuss. She climbed the stairs and sat on her bed, and she thought about calling her mother and decided to do it tomorrow when she had more words for what the day had been. She lay down. She thought about what it would mean to stop waiting for the space she was in to collapse. To stop testing. To stop arriving difficult and sharp and braced for the quality of welcome to shift. To let herself, slowly and without performance, be in a place where she was wanted without conditions attached to the wanting. She wasn't there yet. She knew where she was going. For the first time since the train and the pink sky at the edge of Meran, she was not heading north for herself alone. She was heading somewhere. With someone who had already been watching for her arrival and had cleared the space before she got there and had simply, without announcement, without fanfare, made sure the door was open. Outside, the Valdresh Mountains sat where they always sat, older than anything, holding up the edge of the sky the way they had been doing since before anyone alive could remember. Inside the room above the laundry, Nadia Voss closed her eyes. She slapped.